On this video, I would like to do a translation from Matthew 5 in the Greek text with a running commentary. So we begin, when he saw the crowds, he went up into a mountain, and when he sat down, his disciples came to him. It is striking to me that Jesus took his disciples and began to instruct them. And it's interesting how he did it by sitting down. Today, we do most of our teaching or instructing standing up, the church, the pulpit, for example. And it's striking to me how Jesus, a rabbi at that time, would sit down. And that's what Jesus is doing. And then it reads, and when he opened his mouth, he was teaching them, saying, one of the most important things in the ministry of Jesus was teaching. And so he's teaching the disciples, happy or blessed or happy are the poor in spirit, for belonging to them is the kingdom of the heavens, or the rule of the heavens. In other words, those that have a need, those that are poor in spirit, not those that are arrogant or rich in spirit in a worldly sense, but those who have a need for the Lord. And they will indicate with that the kingdom of heaven belongs to them, Jesus is saying. And then he goes on, blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. Mourning, no doubt, for one's own sins and mourning for the sins of the world and what's going on. And they that mourn and cry out to the Lord will be comforted. And then, blessed are the gentle, for they shall inherit the earth. And I have said many times that gentleness is often used here of a horse under control. And blessed are those that are gentle in spirit, for they will be the ones that will inherit the earth, possibly looking at the world to come and the new heaven and new earth. And then, blessed are they who hunger and thirst for righteousness, because they shall be filled. Hungering and thirsting after doing what the Lord would have us to do. Blessed or happy are they, for they will be filled with God's presence and the joy that he gives them in their hearts. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. It's important to be merciful, not unmerciful, but merciful. For they who are that way will receive God's pity and mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. It's important to have a pure heart, not being, let's say, double, giving a double standard, looking one way but thinking another, but being like children, pure in our heart, where they will be the ones that will really have a vision, the beatific vision, will really be able to see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the sons of God. As we make peace with others, that's how we will be called God's children or God's sons and daughters. We need to be making peace, which is the opposite of what is often happening in human relationships. And then, blessed are they who are persecuted on account of righteousness, because belonging to them is the kingdom of heaven. Those who are being persecuted because they are doing what is right in following the teachings of the Lord, they are happy and blessed because it's indicative that they have the kingdom or the rule of the heavens. And by the way, the rule of the heavens is another way of speaking of the rule of God or the kingdom of God, from a Jewish way of describing it. So, blessed are you when they shall revile you and persecute you and shall say all evil against you, lying on account of me. In other words, you're happy if you are reviled and persecuted and all evil is being said if it's for the sake of Christ. And he pronounces a blessing or a happiness at that point. So rejoice and be glad, because your reward in heaven is great. For thus they persecuted the prophets which were before you. When you're working in that kind of a situation where you're seeking to please the Lord and yet you're being spoken against and so forth, if it's for his sake, he said, you can rejoice because great is your reward in heaven. For that's what happened to the prophets and how they were persecuted. And then he goes on to talk about salt and light. He says, you are the salt of the earth. And if the salt should lose its flavor, by what shall it be salted? It is availing nothing except being cast outside to be trodden underfoot by men. In other words, we are to flavor the world, Jesus is saying, as his disciples, with a different type of lifestyle from what is seen often in the world. And I think the Beatitudes and the Sermon on the Mount are showing what that is all about. So we need to flavor the world as believers in Christ with salt that brings out a positive flavor. And then light is the second imagery that Jesus uses. You are the light of the world. A city that is hid upon a hill is not able. Notice, a city that is not able to be a city. Let me translate it. On a hill cannot be hid, is what the Greek reads. In other words, a city on a hill is seen. And furthermore, that's what you're to be like, a city on a hill. You're to be visible. Neither do they burn a lampstand or a lamp and place it under a bushel basket, but upon a lampstand. And you don't take a lamp and put it under a bushel basket, but you let it shine in all the house. And so we're to let our light shine. You don't hide the light, Jesus says. Thus, let your light shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. In other words, we're to let our light show in the way that we live, that people may see the good works of a believer that is living by following Christ, which was what I think the Sermon on the Mount is all about. And then he goes on to talk about how he's not come to destroy the law, but to fulfill it. Do not think that I have come to destroy or abolish the law or the prophets. I came not to destroy, but to fulfill. In other words, I'm not here to destroy it, but I'm going to fulfill it, bringing out the interior meaning of the law. For verily I say to you, except until heaven and earth pass away, one yod and one tittle shall in no wise pass from the law until all be accomplished or be fulfilled. A yod is the smallest, consonant in the Hebrew Bible. A tittle is like a flurry, that like if you wanted to make a letter like a dalet, a tittle would be the line that hangs over. It's sort of like if you were going to cross a T, a tittle would be the crossing of the T in Hebrew, or the dotting of an I could illustrate it. In other words, even to the smallest dimension, I've come to fulfill the law. And whosoever shall destroy one of these least commandments and shall teach men otherwise, he shall be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whosoever shall do and teach, this one shall be called great in the kingdom of the heavens. In other words, if you destroy one of the commandments and don't do it, and you teach otherwise, you'll be called least. If you do it and teach it, then you will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. So Jesus is saying, I've not come to destroy, but to fulfill and bring out the interior meaning. For I say to you that except your righteousness exceed and is more than the scribes and the Pharisees, you will in no wise enter into the kingdom of the heavens. In other words, your righteousness has to go far beyond that of the scribes and the Pharisees, which people thought were the end game of righteousness. Unless it does, you will not enter into the kingdom of the heavens. So he begins to talk about how he has come to fulfill the law. He talks first of all about anger. You have heard that it has been said by them of old, you shall not commit murder or violence. But notice he says, and whosoever shall kill or commit violence is liable to the judgment. But I say to you, that's true, that's very true, but let's take it even to the interior thought. But I say to you that every one who is angry with his brother is liable for the judgment. And whosoever shall say to his brother, Raka, which means something like empty-headed, shall be liable for the Sanhedrin, the highest court, the supreme court of the Jewish world at that time. And whosoever shall say fool shall be liable for Gehenna of fire. Gehenna was that fire which burned the garbage outside of the city on the valley of Hinnom, Gehinnom. And it was likened to the eternal fire of hell, so to speak, of Gehinnom, of Gehenna. And so what he's saying here is, if you really hate your brother, it's as though you've committed violence in your heart against him. Bring it into the interior part is what he's doing. And if you bring your gift to the altar, and there you remember that your brother is having something against you, then leave your gift before the altar and go and first be reconciled to your brother, and then when you come, offer your gift. In other words, if you really are going to worship the Lord and you know there's something against your brother or your sister, go make it right and then come and worship. I'll never forget years ago as a pastor, two brothers were fighting, and one of them came to me and said, Gary, I won't take the Lord's Supper from my brother. Would you bring it to me privately? And I said, I can't do that. You're not to have hardness against your brother. So go make it right and then let him serve the supper to you. That's what I think Jesus is saying. So be agreeing with your adversary while you are with him on the way, lest your adversary deliver you over to the judge, and the judge to the guard, and you shall be cast into prison. For verily I say to you, you will not get out until you have paid the last penny. The last quadranten is the Greek. In other words, make it right before you get into a court situation and before you owe everything. Try to make things right on the way, is what he's saying. So what he's teaching here is that interior part of God's law, that he's bringing out the inner meaning. The external, yes, don't do violence, don't do evil to anyone, owe anyone nothing but to love one another. But even the internal, don't even be angry and think hatred toward another, is the point that Jesus is making. So the external and the internal, though, is where Jesus is focusing as well as to the external. Do not do violence, but don't even think violence in your heart, I believe Jesus is saying. Then he moves on to adultery. You have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks upon a woman to lust after her has already committed adultery in his heart. In other words, you don't even think adultery. You don't come and think about this in a way in your mind that would want to commit adultery. It's as though you've already committed it. And if your right eye is causing you to stumble, then take it from you and cast it into the fire, cast it away, cut it out, is what he's saying. But it's better, throw it away, is really what he's saying. For it is better, in order that one of your members should be destroyed, than all the body should be cast into Gehinnom. In other words, make it right in your thought. Don't think adulterous thoughts. Otherwise, it's as though you're committing the act. So he's looking at lust beginning in the mind, just like anger beginning in the mind leads to wrong actions toward one. Committing violence interior in the mind, then the external often grows out of that. And he's saying, no, don't even think that in your heart, and don't even think adultery in your heart. And if your right hand is causing you to stumble, then cut it from you and cast it from you. For it is better that you lose one of your members than that all the body be cast into Gehinnom, into Gehenna. So again, he's talking about, he's exaggerating, but what he's saying is, look, let's have the proper mental and heart attitude in these areas. And then it has been said that whosoever divorces his wife, let him give her a bill of divorcement. But I say to you that everyone who puts away his wife, except for a cause of fornication, is causing her to commit adultery. And if one marries one who has been put away, he is committing adultery. What I think Jesus is saying here is they had taken Deuteronomy 24 and had used it as an excuse for divorce for any reason. And I think Jesus is not doing away with Deuteronomy 24 because he says in chapter 19 that God allowed it because of the hardness of human heart. He allowed for divorce and remarriage. But when it's abused, I think he's saying, wait a minute, let's take it back to the normative principle of the law. And that is that basically I say to you, just to put away your wife if she burns the toast. No, you're misusing that. Now, I like the analogy that if you're driving and someone is dying of a heart attack, then you see an emergency vehicle, it's going to go past the speed limit because there's a heart attack victim being taken to the hospital. However, if everyone begins to drive like the emergency vehicle and they're not heart attack victims, I think the police officer will say, wait a minute, you're not an emergency vehicle. It's not an emergency situation. So I think that's all Jesus is saying. I don't think he's doing away with Deuteronomy, but I think 24, but I think he's simply saying, you've misused it. Let's use it in balance. It is there because of the hardness of human heart, but don't use that as an excuse for a divorce for any reason, which would be like cars driving way past the speed limit because an emergency vehicle can. That's what I think Jesus is addressing. So then we move on. You have heard it was said by them of old, you shall not swear, but you shall give your oath to the Lord. But I say to you, do not swear at all, neither by heaven, for it is the throne of God, neither by earth, for it is his footstool, neither by Jerusalem, because that is the city of the great king, neither by your head you should swear, because you cannot make one hair white or black. But let your word be yes, yes, and no, no. And anything more is out of the evil one. I think what Jesus is saying here, You could take an oath and say, I swear, for example, by the Lord. But, don't swear by the Lord, but you could say, I swear uh, by heaven, for example. I won't use the name Lord. But no, that won't work because heaven is God's throne. Or you might say, I swear by the earth that I'll do this, and you're not intending to do it. No, because that is God's footstool. Or I swear by Jerusalem. No, that is the city of the great king. Or I swear by my head. No, you're still swearing by God because you can't make one hair whiter back. I'm aware of that the older I get. Hair becomes white. So let your speech be yes, yes, and no, no. Just be honest. Don't swear by something else in order to make people think that you're going to do something when you're really not. I think that's all Jesus is saying. Then he talks about retaliation. You have heard that it has been said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist the evil one. But whosoever shall smite you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And to the one who desires to go to court, to take away your coat, or to sue you in court, take away your coat, let him have your garment, your outer cloak as well. And whosoever shall compel you to go 1 mile, go 2. And to the one who asks, give, and to the one who desires to borrow from you, do not turn away. I think all he's saying here is, it's not an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, but you turn to the other cheek. You basically be non-resistant. I think this is what he's saying all the way through here. He's teaching a non-resistant attitude, an attitude of not resisting and not returning evil for evil, but overcoming evil with good. My mother taught me this years ago when there was a young man that wanted to beat me up. And she said, let's do this, Gary. Let's invite them over for chili supper. And let's play basketball in the backyard. We had a basketball hoop in our driveway in the back. I said, but Mother, you don't understand. These people are wild. She said, let's try it. So she fixed a chili supper. We invited them over. We played basketball first. And then that afternoon, after the game, we had a chili supper. And it was very interesting. Years later, my mother, when I was in college, I was in about the 7th grade at that time. Mother said, you're not going to believe this, Gary, but I met a young man who came to me and said, Mrs. Stats, do you remember me? She said, I'm not sure. I was the young man that came to your house for chili supper years ago. He never forgot that. And I think that's overcoming evil with good. That was being non-resistant, which my mother taught me when I was in the 7th grade. And that gentleman became one of my best friends. That may not always happen, but that's the way we are to relate. And then finally, you have heard that it has been written, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray on behalf of those who persecute you, that you might be sons of your Father who is in heaven, because he is causing his sun to shine upon the good and the evil, upon the evil and upon the good, and he is causing rain to come upon the righteous and the unrighteous. But if you love those who love you, what reward are you having? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? These were the despised lot, tax collectors, because they were often dishonest in taking some money for themselves as they were collecting taxes. So you're just no different than them, Jesus is saying. And if you greet your brethren only, what more are you doing? Do not even the heathen do the same? Be therefore perfect or mature as your Father who is in heaven is perfect. I think what Jesus is saying, be complete. perfect in the sense, love people equally. It doesn't mean you have the same emotional feeling, but you treat them equally. Just like the Lord causes his sun to shine upon the good and the bad, and he rains upon the righteous and the unrighteous. So you do the same. You treat people the same way the Lord treats people, by bringing rain and by bringing sunshine. And it doesn't mean he's talking about an emotional feeling as much as treating them in an equal way, like the rain and the sunshine that the Lord brings. And so be perfect, I think, simply means be mature and be complete in the way you treat other people. Treat them like the Lord treats humanity, by causing the rain and the sunshine upon the good and the evil. So this is chapter 5, and I'm trying to give a summary, reading or translating from the Greek text and giving it a summary, kind of a running commentary. And what a beautiful, beautiful chapter in the Beatitudes and in the way a believer's life should be lived out. I think that's what he's been talking about.